Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to go ahead and break down this Minnesota Timberwolves Denver Nuggets playoff series. They're going to be facing off in the second round starting in a few days, so we need to go ahead and talk about it, especially because this is the chance to be one of the best playoff series of this entire postseason, and one of the best ones we've seen in a long time. These two teams have been dancing around the standings next to each other the entire year, ended up at the 2 and the 3 spots, and got it done in the first round. Minnesota destroyed Phoenix in their series. It was called a nightmare matchup by a lot of people, me included. Many people picked the Suns to win. Ultimately, Minnesota showed that there was a reason they were the much higher seed. Ant was amazing in that series, had his big, I feel like, national coming out moment where a lot of people now realize that, hey, this guy's a rising superstar. Karl-Anthony Towns looked pretty good coming off his lengthy injury. Gobert was great, as always, at defending the rim. Jay McDaniels, Nikola Walker, guys that were locking down on the perimeter. You had Mike Conley playing his butt off as well. Everything clicked for the Timberwolves to help them get the sweep. They looked fantastic, and anybody who doubted the Wolves coming into the playoffs now should know this is a team that has all the potential in the world to make it out of this Western Conference. Meanwhile, for the Nuggets, they won in 5 over the Lakers, the second year in a row where they got a series done in 5 games or less against that team, but it was a much tougher series. They went down by double digits, it felt like, in every first quarter of this matchup. They would eventually battle back before the Lakers put in one final punch, and the Nuggets would often get it done. It took 2 huge last-second Jamal Murray shots to win a couple of these games. It wasn't the prettiest, but they still did get out of there somewhat quickly to set up this matchup, with these two teams feeling like squads that are going to throw punches for at least 6 games, but probably 7. So let's go ahead and break this thing down. I'm going to begin with some stats, get into my keys to the matchup, and then, as always, I will be making a prediction towards the end of the video. So before you see it, let me know what your prediction is. Let me know if it changes by the time you finish listening to this. Let's talk about it. Beginning with the stats. The Nuggets overall on the 82-game regular season were the 5th ranked offense, 8th ranked defense, and had the 4th best net rating, of course finishing as the 2 seed, while the Wolves finished 1 seed below them with the 17th offense, the best defense by far in the NBA, and the 3rd best net rating. Over the course of their first playoff series, things have shifted a little bit. Minnesota was actually the best offense in the first round. They had the 6th best defense and the 3rd overall net rating, while Denver had the 8th offense and defense and the 6th best net rating. The season series between these two teams was split 2 games to 2. The Wolves won the 1st and the 3rd contest, while the Nuggets won the 2nd and the 4th. The final 3 games were played without Karl-Anthony Towns, so it's kind of hard to judge some of those games, but I think there's a lot we can take away from. One thing I do want to give the Wolves credit for is the 2 games that they lost that kept it within single digits, and they did manage to win one of those games with Cat not out there. They played out of their minds, and they've played the Nuggets as well as basically anybody has this season, which is a reason why a lot of people think the Wolves could be best suited out of almost anybody to finally take down the reigning champions. These are 2 very physical teams, a lot of size, star power on both sides, whether it's Jokic, Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., it's Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, Karl-Anthony Towns, the reigning 6th man of the year now, and Naz Reid. Great players on both sides, some really interesting stylistic differences. Like I said earlier, this is the chance to be the best matchup of the second round and maybe the premier series of the entire playoffs. So let's get into the keys to the matchup, and I think the biggest storyline out of all of them is going to be the Minnesota Timberwolves defense going up against that ridiculous Nuggets offense. The Wolves this season had a historic margin between them and the 2nd overall ranked defense this year. I believe that was Boston. Well, the Nuggets are a well-oiled machine on the offensive end. I called them, I think, a living organism in my video I made about them towards the end of the season. Nobody has, up to this point, figured out how to consistently stop the Nuggets when they've got their guys in the lineup. Jokic is one of the best offensive players ever. Jamal Murray is an insane shot creator that always levels up in the playoffs. MPJ right now is playing some of the best basketball of his career. KCP is knocked down from the outside, a great connector. Aaron Gordon, maybe the best cutter in the league, and he and Jokic seemingly have this telepathic connection. There have not been a lot of answers that anybody has discovered consistently for the Denver Nuggets, especially when you get to the playoffs. But if there's any team that has the personnel to slow them down, it is probably Minnesota. Anthony Edwards, as great as he's been offensively at the same time, is a really good defender at this point. Jay McDaniels should be on an all-defensive team, has a lot of length. Rudy Gobert is the best rim protector in the NBA, a guy that can really try and slow down Jokic, as well as the plethora of guys on the Nuggets that are going to try and get inside. You've got Nikola Jokic Walker, who's great off the bench as a defender. Cat and Conley, two of their weaker links overall individually defensively, both held up pretty well against Phoenix. They did a great job. Naz Reid gives them even more size in an already huge lineup, which is big against Denver, who is one of the biggest teams in the NBA themselves. They've got stoppers all over the place. Chris Finch had an amazing defensive game plan for the Suns. I imagine he'll cook up something similar for Denver. This is a team that seemingly has all the tools, or at least the most tools out of almost anybody, to try and stop the Nuggets from basically getting whatever they want, like they've done pretty much the entire past year or so. I imagine they'll go with their usual strategy of having Karl-Anthony Towns on Jokic and Rudy Gobert sticking Aaron Gordon and just roaming off of him, being the destructive defensive force that he is. This is a strategy they've employed against a lot of teams, and if Aaron Gordon isn't making them pay from the outside, they can afford to do it here and probably stop a lot of the momentum that Denver builds up offensively. AG is shooting just 10% through his first 5 playoff games so far. He has to make them pay way more. If he's not going to knock down the threes, just be a constant threat to hit them with backdoor cuts. Make them think about you, because if they aren't, things get way harder for Denver. Meanwhile, for Cat, who is, again, probably going to be sticking Jokic individually if they keep up the same scheme they've done for the past few years, he's got to stay out of foul trouble. That was a problem for him in the Phoenix series. He did enough in some of the later games to stay on the court, but he's going to be guarding the best offensive big in the world, so he's got to be really smart. They need him on that offensive end. They need him just with his size defensively. He can't get into foul trouble. If he does, I assume Jokic is going to be attacking him to try and make that happen. Things get a lot harder for Minnesota. You also need whoever's sticking Michael Porter Jr. to stay with him at all times. He was getting loose way too much against the Lakers, which led to him putting up 23 points per game, shooting 55% from the field, over 40% from deep. He was completely unstoppable. You cannot afford that. If MPJ is going off, things are going to get quickly out of hand. So whether it's Jay McDaniels, Nikola Jokic Walker, got to stick with him at all times. Then there's Jamal Murray, who has been one of the biggest playoff risers in basketball over the past few years, but this season, at least through the first 5 games, there's still plenty of time, hasn't really been himself. Against the Lakers, did put up 24 points per game and 7 dimes, which is great, but shot just 40% from the field and 30% from deep. Really, outside of those big clutch shots, was not a very good series from Jamal Murray. He has to be way better, and he's going into a much tougher defensive matchup here with Minnesota, so he's got to find his rhythm if you're the Nuggets. And if you're the Wolves, just continue to keep that pressure on him, make him work really hard for all of his shots, and if you can do that and keep him at this somewhat limited level compared to what he's been in the past, you've got a great shot at winning this. In fact, while we're on that note, the Nuggets as a whole kind of struggled in that first series, specifically from the outside. They shot just 30.8% from deep against the Lakers, and Minnesota is a much better defensive team. They're really good at running you off the perimeter. The Nuggets have to hit their threes. They have to be way better. That's the reason why so many of those games were close, why the Lakers built out those big leads. They just couldn't hit their outside shots. If they do it against Minnesota, they're in a way better spot, but if this continues, it's a really bad sign for the Nuggets. Ultimately, though, what it may come down to for the Wolves is, can they just stop Jokic from being Jokic? Against the Wolves this season, he put up 32, 12, and 4. Last year in the playoffs against them, had 26, 12, and 9. And against the Lakers in the first round this year, he put up 28 points, 16 rebounds, and 10 assists, despite a guy that you might know named Anthony Davis often checking him. There has been no solution to Jokic throughout his entire career, and he continues to get better and better. You have to slow him down at least a little bit. I don't know if it's possible, but you've got to at least try, and if you're not slowing him down, you've got to cut off everybody else. It's one of the two. If you can't pull off one of those things, you're going to have a hard time beating this team 4 games out of 7. Flipping over to the Nuggets defense, one of my big concerns for them is how do they stop Anthony Edwards? He just destroyed Phoenix in the first round. 31 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, 51, 44, 84 splits. Easily the biggest reason why it was a sweep. And the Suns aren't like an elite defensive team, but they're not bad. They managed to slow him down in the regular season, but clearly that didn't matter because the second he got to the playoffs, Chris Finch cooked up a great game plan, and more often than not, the Suns could play good defense, but it wasn't doing anything against Anthony Edwards. He was getting to the rim at will, dunking on guys, hitting step-back threes, pull-up shots. He has one of the most diverse and exciting offensive games in the entire NBA right now, and has often, more than not this season, looked pretty unstoppable. Not to mention last year against this Nuggets team in the playoffs, he was insane. 32 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. Shot really well and made the series competitive without Naz Reid or Jaden McDaniels out there, 2 of their most important pieces. You also had Nuggets players saying that he was one of the most difficult individual players to stop in their title run, and that Minnesota gave them the most trouble out of almost anybody. Now, Denver does have some really good options to throw at Ant defensively, whether it's Aaron Gordon, who has a lot of size and physicality, KCP, who is one of the better wing defenders in the league this season. You've got Peyton Watson off the bench, who gives them a lot of length. The team as a whole has a bunch of size. They can be really physical with Ant. They are a team that seemingly has guys that can slow him down, but Ant has overcome basically every obstacle he's faced so far this season. Again, he was great against them last year, and he's on absolute fire coming into this matchup, playing the best basketball of his entire career. You've got to find a way to slow him down. If you don't, things get really scary. Stopping him, in my opinion, by far the #1 priority for this Denver defense. I think they've got a shot, but none of it may matter because Ant is just on another level right now. Sticking with the Wolves offensively, while I have a lot of faith in Anthony Edwards to do big things, I have less faith in their overall offense. Coming into the playoffs, we knew their defense was going to be insane, but the offense had some question marks. They were never a great half-court scoring team. They had a bunch of turnover issues, often fell apart down the stretch of games offensively, just weren't able to create quality looks. And in the first round, they did all of that with ease, but Denver is a much tougher opponent in that regard. Can they keep up the insane play that gave them the best offensive rating in the first round like we saw, or are they going to regress a little bit more towards their usual performance like we saw all throughout the regular season? There are a couple of things that were concerning against the Suns, like Naz Reid, Nikola Alexander Walker, and Jaden McDaniels, all key role players for them, shot under 33% from the outside. That's not going to get easier against Denver. You need those guys to step up and hit those outside shots because they're going to be throwing a lot of pressure at Ant, at Cat. You have to be able to make them pay if you're those role players. They've also really got to clean up the turnovers. Again, it was a big issue in the regular season. In the first round, despite how good they were, they had the 4th highest turnover percentage. Denver is going to make you pay way more for those turnovers than Phoenix ever was going to. There is very little room for error against this Denver Nuggets team. We saw that with the Lakers where they built up these double-digit leads, but in the clutch they would make one mistake or two mistakes, and all of a sudden the Nuggets go up 5. They will make you pay time and time again, especially in those final moments. If they turn the ball over, the Nuggets are going to start to run away with the game. Finally, my last key to the matchup is the health of these teams. For the Timberwolves, Karl-Anthony Towns looked pretty good against the Suns coming back recently off that long injury, but this is a much bigger test. They're going to have him guarding presumably the best player in the world with Nikola Jokic out there. It's going to be way more physical. It's going to be a longer series. He's now already played a few games. How is he going to hold up with, again, that injury having not happened too long ago? Then for the Nuggets, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope twisted his ankle and left the game in Game 5, went back and forth between the locker room, did play around 20 minutes in the second half, so maybe he's okay, and we'll have 5 days to go ahead and rest up leading into this series, but that ankle is something to keep an eye on. Is his mobility going to be okay, especially if he's trying to guard a guy like Anthony Edwards? Finally, you've got a calf issue that's been lingering with Jamal Murray. It almost kept him out of Game 5. Ultimately, he played, and played really, really well, so maybe it's not really that big of a concern. But again, like I said with Cat, this is going to be a way more physical series. There's way better defenders being thrown at him, and they need him to play better than he did over the Lakers series. So if that issue lingers and it limits him, that's a big concern, especially because the Denver Nuggets have pretty limited depth. The bench really struggled in that LA series. They need them to be a lot better, and Minnesota has a bunch of depth. The Nuggets cannot afford for Jamal Murray to not be the usual Jamal Murray, and that calf issue could prove troublesome. So those are some of the main things I'm looking at coming into this matchup. Of course, it's not everything, but I feel like those are the most important pieces to go ahead and take a look at before we go ahead and try and make a prediction, which I'm going to try to do. And it's really tough. With everything I said, there is clearly a lot of reasons why people think the Wolves can pull off this upset against the reigning champs. You've got Anthony Edwards looking unstoppable. Gobert is a force down low, one of the best defenders in the world. Gonna win Defensive Player of the Year. They've got overall defenders all over the place, whether it's on the perimeter, guys down low with a lot of size. They're gonna have more rest coming into this matchup, and they seem to be really clicking at this moment coming off that murder against Phoenix. While the Nuggets weren't super impressive against the Lakers. They did get out of there in 5, but it was a bunch of really close games. On the other hand, it is the Denver Nuggets we're talking about here. They've got the best player in the world, a ridiculous cast around him, a great coach in Michael Malone, and it's a team that has not often looked vulnerable throughout this past year or so. To me, this is a true toss-up series. It could go either way in 6 or 7. I'm imagining 7 games just feels like one of those that's destined to go the distance with how these teams match up, all the storylines coming into it. Ultimately, I think I'm going to go with the Denver Nuggets in 7 for a few reasons. Number one, they do have home court advantage, so if it gets to a game 7 like I think it will, they'll be playing in Denver, which is a really hard place to win in at all, never mind in a closeout game. I also think there will be a bit of regression from Minnesota offensively against a better defense and a bit of a return to form for Denver from deep, really just due to variance. I don't think the guys that shot that poorly are going to shoot that poorly again. The turnover issues also really worry me for Minnesota. Again, you have no room for error against the Nuggets. Not to mention, the Nuggets just have the best player in the world in Nikola Jokic, and that's one of the main things that came down to for me, where if I feel like two teams are pretty evenly matched, I'm going to go with the squad that has the best player in the series, and when it's the best player in the sport, I think I've got to lean that way with Jokic. When he and the Nuggets are at their best, they just feel impossible to beat 4 times out of 7. I think they're going to rise to the occasion. Maybe the Wolves pull off the upset if you pick them. Again, I do not blame you whatsoever. It feels like they have a real shot at this, but give me the defending champs until somebody beats them. I'm not going to really pick against them. With all that being said, I appreciate you watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. And of course, comment down below who you have winning this and in how many games. Who do you think are the key players to this? What are some maybe other key matchups or storylines that I didn't mention in this video that are important to think about? And yeah, I appreciate you watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, sit back.